Yep.
Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order. Could I have a roll call, please?
All right, and as always, I'll take you in the order you appear on my screen. So Commissioner Curzon,
Present.
Commissioner Callahan,
Present.
Commissioner Kilroy,
Here.
Commissioner Carlson,
Here.
Commissioner Walters,
Here.
Commissioner Bauer,
Here.
and Chair Light.
Present. Okay, salute to the flag. Leslie, would you mind leading us?
Sure. I pledge
Pledge
allegiance
allegiance to the flag
Of
of
the
the United States
of
of America
and to
to
the
the
republic
republic
for which it
which
stands,
one
nation,
nation,
under God,
under God,
God,
indivisible, with liberty
liberty
and justice for all.
Those are always entertaining.
Yes.
Let's see, could I have a motion to approve the order of the agenda? I did want to note the blue folder item is going to be discussed in L1. So do I have a motion to approve the order?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay. Anybody opposed? Okay. So we'll go on with the agenda as written. Let's see. We've got the blue folder item I just discussed. That's going to be in L1. Is there anything else in the blue folder?
There are no other blue folder items for you tonight.
Okay. Let's see. Consent calendar. We have the approval for the affidavit of posting and the approval of the minutes. Does anybody want to pull anything from the consent calendar?
Nope.
No? Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the items in the consent calendar?
So moved. Second.
Okay. Anybody opposed? Okay. Let's see. No excluded consent calendar items. Do we have any public participation on non-agenda items?
I'm checking, so you do not have any e-comments on that. And we do not have any attendees at our meeting yet, so we do not have any public participation on non-agenda items.
Okay. Let's see, item I. Anybody have any ex parte communications? Going once, going twice, no? Okay. So there's no public hearings, no items continued from previous agendas. Let's see, we're going down to L1, the quarterly public safety report.
All right, great. Get right to business tonight. So as you know, we have a quarterly safety update where we invite representatives from the police department and the fire department, harbor patrol, to come and talk to you about the activities that have been happening down in the harbor. We have representation tonight from both divisions. What I think I'd like to do is maybe start with Sergeant Jason Sapien from the police department and let him go through the activity, and then ask Division Chief May to follow that with his report, which will also include, as the chair mentioned, the blue folder presentation related to the boat concerts and the process related to that. So Sergeant Sapien, maybe if you want to get us started and take us through what's been happening in your group over the last quarter.
For the last quarter, we've expanded our unit a little bit for the summer, where we have 2 guys working on the pier itself on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, which it's our other guys out on the boat more often. So you'll be seeing our boat out during the summer fairly regularly. I'm not sure if our last meeting we had our boat retrofitted with some new collars, some new engines.
Is it just me, or is other people having
No,
these
I'm
issues?
having a problem too.
Yeah, hey, Jason, you're not quite, you're kind of, I don't know if you want to log on or log back in, and it's not, the audio is a little choppy.
Let me come right back.
Okay, Division Chief May, maybe you could just go ahead and go through your presentation while Sergeant Sapien's doing that.
Of course. Good evening. Let me introduce myself. This is the first time I've met many of you. Division Chief Jason May. I've worked for the city for the past 18 years. I'm recently promoted to the position of division chief, and my specific assignment is fire prevention, which does much of the fire special event planning through the city. And I'm also assigned the battalion chief in charge of B shift. So came into this role about a year and a half ago, so I'm still kind of finding my way through it. But tonight I'm excited to get to present to you not only our Harbor Patrol statistics and talk about a couple of things they've been doing, but also walk through the much contested harbor concert process that we've developed within the fire department in collaboration with the police department, community services, and the waterfront division in terms of developing a process to allow people to have them legally and safely within the harbor itself. I'll touch on that at the very end, but I'll walk through our Harbor Patrol statistics really quickly for the month of April. They responded to 14 Maydays, 20 medical calls, 2 agencies assists with LA County. They processed approximately 10 anchorage permits. They enforced, 8 different, not citations, but 8 different types of ordinances, ranging from PFDs, navigation lights, license checks, and making sure that they removed all the navigation hazards in the harbor. They made several public information contacts as well. In terms of significant events that they had responded to, in April, we had opening days for Port Royal, which I'll touch on in my presentation very briefly. And then also we had potentially some continued live band concerts, which we've been working closely with the Marine Enforcement Unit, specifically Sergeant Sapien, and just making sure that the process we developed is one that meets the needs of all the parties in the harbor. So without further ado, I'll give you my quick, very short 4-slide PowerPoint presentation regarding the harbor concerts, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with. Let me turn off my volume really quick. So as you're all very well aware, the video on our left-hand side of our screen is video footage we've submitted from one of the 10 harbor concerts that occurred in the fall/winter. With varying levels of attendance, this is one of the more well-attended events. This video, it's on repeat, so I apologize if you start getting motion sick, but I just want to capture kind of the current state of affairs before we've kind of tried to develop a process that accommodates everybody's needs. Obviously, these are very well attended. They're well liked by many members of the community, but it does create some challenges in our harbor itself. So while we'd like to propagate a well-established community event that seems to draw our community together, there are a lot of safety hazards that are kind of tied to this specific event. So what are those challenges that our Harbor Patrol is facing? And I apologize again if you see makes you motion sick on the right-hand side, but this is, again, footage from another separate concert. In both footages that you're seeing, you'll notice that our Harbor Patrol vessel and somewhere in there is the Marine Enforcement Unit. They're both very specifically committed to keeping people out of the lanes of navigation and also preventing people from getting flag tying too closely, keeping people out of the water. It's a significant commitment of our resources as the event currently stands. So these are just in general kind of the things that we worry about from the public safety perspective. First and foremost is our emergency access to the participants, both the boats and the paddleboarders and the swimmers. In general, the boats tend to side tie, they drop anchor, they're tied up to each other, and they make it challenging for both the Harbor Patrol boat and the Marine Enforcement units to gain access to them. If we had some sort of a boat fire, a medical emergency on one of those boats, it's very challenging for us to get in there. And then another problem is people swim to the sandbar that is now formed on the inside of the harbor itself. So you have the sharp things, which are the propellers in the water with the people that are swimming, jumping off paddleboards. So that is an issue in and of itself, especially in that particular area. We have a lot of vessels that are kind of coming back from their day out or headed out on their day out, and they're also dropping anchor kind of in a convenient place, but it tends to be in the navigation channels in the harbor in general. And then both of our resources are committed to these. Now, there haven't been citations issued during the fall and the winter, specifically in the spirit of COVID. It was really challenging for people to get out, find something meaningful to do. That doesn't mean this went on with the blessing of either unit or the fire department or the police department. We managed the consequences of the event, but we didn't cite anybody just because in general, it wasn't a major safety hazard. But going forward, if these been issued, continue, I think it is an issue we want to regulate a little tightly or much tighter than we have. We had a lot of vessels side tied that were all on a single anchor point. And then we had a lot of people kind of jumping into the freight down there that were coming back from their day at Catalina, and they drop anchor, and the party tended to get bigger every time they had it. The third and the last issue I'll speak of is there's now a standing crowd at the end of Mole B, which out of all the things that I've talked about, this seems to generate the most complaints, is the kind of crowd gathering on the rocks at Mole B by Lanaquila and our Fire Station 3 down there. So that's the problem. So what we've done in terms of trying to mitigate the problem is we've mirrored the city's special event application process. So the same process that Beach Life Festival goes through, that the 10K goes through, that the Firecracker 5K goes through, we've kind of narrowed the scope of that. We maintain the same requirements, but narrowed the scope of who it touches. So it's a 5-page document, which I'm happy at the end of my presentation to email out to all of you. That's the first page of it. I just wanted to have you see what kind of the document looks like. But it lists the title of the event, who's putting it on, what time it's going to go on, if there's going to be a noise variance required for the duration of the event, requires the event host to provide a site plan of where everybody's going to be and where the boats are going to be, provide $1 million in liability insurance, waive all financial liability of the city in terms of their responsibility for the event. And it also puts a name on the event, which has been one of the initial challenges in this. It wasn't clear who was hosting the event and who was ultimately the responsible party. So, and I'll give a lot of credit to Port Royal Marina in my presentation and our development of this process. They had opening day in April, and they asked to do a boat concert legally. And they actually said, what if we set up on the city moorings, on the small sea moorings inside the harbor, and conduct our business that way? Everybody is distanced out. The Harbor Patrol and the Marine Enforcement Unit now have access to those units, and we can get in to help people if they need help. People are spaced out. It caps the number of boats that can attend the event. It moves all of our crowd off of Mole B because now the event is being held in front of the Portofino Hotel, and they hosted their event. Unfortunately, the weather was kind of bad that day, so we didn't have a ton of boats. But the ability of people to attend is kind of capped at the number of moorings in that field, because that's also no anchoring zone. And in addition, the sandbar is not as developed, so there's no place for people to swim in and go swimming into the sandbar and swimming out to the boats themselves. So I felt Port Royal actually had a really good solution to kind of the challenges we've been facing with the boat concerts and kind of the party that was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So we've now asked that if they're going to host a boat concert, basically it be hosted along those city moorings. We've actually developed a QR card to hand out to boaters if they want to sign up for one of those moorings. So if our Harbor Patrol or Marine Enforcement Unit sees somebody out there that's tied up to a mooring, like, oh, we didn't pay for it, we hand them this QR card, they scan it with their phone, and now they can legally register for that mooring for the day. And it also provides larger commercial moorings for some of the bigger boats that were now part of this. We don't allow side tying now because in these moorings you can't do that, and it provides excellent access for us in the event of an emergency. And again, this is a 5-page document. I just included the first page to kind of give you the graphics of what it looks like. So in terms of us processing that and going forward, and how this works flowing through the city work path, we're asking for a 7-day processing period from when it's submitted to us, and then meeting all the requirements in terms of providing a plot plan, proof of $1 million of liability insurance, and then completely filling out all of the application. And this mirrors all the other large events in the city, minus it doesn't go to every department in the city. So Beach Life touches Public Works, planning, all the major offices in the city. This just touches the 5 departments you see located below there: police, fire, waterfront, community services, and Public Works. So we get a sign off. They review the event, make sure there are no needs or assignments to that, and then assign their resources as they see fit. So I've assigned one of my plan checkers, one of our new employees to the city, Randy Scoville. He's designed this process. He's designed the information and how it goes back and forth between the different departments, and then also getting back to that party as quickly as possible. One of the intents of designing this is also to be responsive to the community ask for it, and also trying to bring some rules and some organization to the event itself, so they can legally do this, but it provides a certain level of safety. And so in that intent is to also get back, typically if you file the special event permit with the city, it would take several weeks to months to vet that process, and then you move forward. We're trying to commit to that 1 week of turnaround time for people. And last but not least, the event also waives the city of any liability assigned to it. And then we also require that documentation of $1 million of liability insurance if they want to host the event in the city. So that's the extent of my presentation tonight in terms of that process. I'm very happy to field questions regarding this new process. And Commissioner Callahan, I believe you had your hand up first. So
No.
I'll start there.
I think it was Matt Kilroy had his up first, so I'll defer to him.
Ladies first. I don't have a problem. Vicky, go
Thank
ahead.
you, Matt.
I just who I saw first, so it's on there. I don't see so many people.
My question is there any fee?
There's no fee for the application itself. Again, we're trying to be responsive to the needs of the event hosts. If they are charging for the event, if they're charging to come see the band, that does generate a fee. But as long as it's a hosted event where they're just having a band play on the back of their boat and there's no fees exchanged, there's no fee for the application itself. There is a fee for registering for the moorings in the harbor.
Right.
That QR card that we can hand to them so they can legally be on that mooring for the balance of the afternoon. But in terms of the application, unless they generate like a specific city service, like the marine enforcement had to be brought out on an hours that they weren't being operated normally, or we had to put out a second harbor patrol boat because it was the 4th of July and somebody wanted to do the 4th of July. They would be responsible for recovering those fees that were generated by the city to accommodate the event.
Okay, my last question is it first come, first served, or can we have 2 or more events going on at the same time?
The intent is to have a single event on a single day based on the number of moorings that we have. And I don't think we necessarily are looking for Battle of the Bands down in front of the Portofino Hotel. But the large moorings are kind of on the north end of our setup. That's where the larger boats set up and typically where the bands play. And then the smaller moorings is kind of where most of the other people tap their boats for the day.
Sure. Thank you.
You're welcome. Commissioner Kilroy.
Yeah, I guess my question is, does this only relate to the mooring field? What constitutes a special event? I guess what rises to the level of needing a special event permit?
You know, that's a good question. So it's a social gathering, and I don't have like a 50 people or more or 25 people or more number for you, but it's a social gathering that may impact the waterfront as a whole. The intent is basically specifically the boat concerts. But I guess this could be applied to it's specifically for waterborne events. Anything land-based is going to go through the normal vetting special event process. So if you take, for example, if you wanted to have a band play in your front yard on your block, that would go through a regular special event process with the city.
Okay. Because my next question was, is there a level, something smaller, or do we accommodate a smaller gathering differently? The $1 million insurance would seem to me to be a little bit of a stumbling block for a lot of events, a lot of people. And I was just wondering, it started me thinking, what size event are we talking about? Do we have something planned, like an impromptu band playing on the back of somebody's boat that they never intended it to rise to the level of needing a permit? And I guess the answer is we don't have any. This is right now it's a one size fits all. I guess the other question, what happens when they don't get a permit?
So
Shut down?
Well, we'll start. There's 2 questions here. So I guess maybe Sergeant Sapien may have a better answer than I do, because again, law enforcement is kind of a little outside of where I work and my area of expertise. But I guess as long as you host the event and it doesn't create problems for other people in the environment or complaints, I think that's a small sized event that doesn't generate problems for your neighbors, isn't attracting other parties, isn't in an area of the harbor where they're not supposed to. I guess that would fall under that, like not needing a permit. But the permit gives us the ability to basically strictly enforce some of the harbor rules as we see fit. Based on some community complaints, we've wanted to more strictly enforce some of the codes and regulations in the harbor, but it's hard to tell, like, this is a nice community event. It seems like to draw a very local crowd. It's hard to tell them that they can't do it without giving them a pathway to do it legally. And so that's the intent of this process.
Right.
And then if somebody does elect to host the event without going through the process, it also gives us a pretty good standing point to enforce those codes and rules that are in the harbor. Is like, hey, we have this process, you were aware of it, and it's creating problems for your neighbors in the harbor. So, and basically it's going to be followed up with by the city attorney's office.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. We want to be reasonable and fair to all the parties in the harbor. That's the intention, is kind of trying to balance the scales a little bit and to rein things in. It seemed like the concerts were getting larger and larger and larger over the course of the year. And that sandbar is pretty fun during the middle of summer. So we kind of wanted to move the event away from there and kind of just make it something that the local community can enjoy, but it doesn't become a draw for Marina Del Rey and Huntington. Chairman Light.
We haven't seen the 5-page permit, but do you ask how they're powering their sound? Is there any concern with them plugging AC equipment into a boat that may be underamped for, that kind of draw on its electrical system?
Our end of that's a good question. Our area of kind of concern, while that the amperage draw might be a very large concern in terms of potentially a fire hazard, we ask about the amplified sound in regards to the impact on the neighbors. So the police department will typically recognize the time of the noise and issue a noise variance for that time period specifically. But we don't inspect like the band equipment, just like we're probably not going to inspect the band equipment at Beach Life in general. So
yeah, I always had two concerns. One was, you overdraw from the system and it starts on fire, like you said. Or the second is, someone bumps a speaker, it goes an amp, goes in the water, and there's people swimming.
Yeah, I think that would require a lot of electricity, but I'm not an expert in that area either. But that is a concern, and again, the intent is to kind of rein in the event itself, because as you saw on the two video screens, there's a lot of people down there, a lot of moving parts, a lot of propellers, and a lot of people in the ocean. So it seems like it's a very homegrown event that generates a lot of positive feedback, but it definitely needs a higher level of safety to it. So
No, I totally agree. And I'm glad we're not shutting it down, but I am glad that we're also regulating it and keeping it safe. So I applaud the effort. Do you check for skippers drinking during the event?
We don't, our Harbor Patrol unit and our Marine Enforcement unit, unless they see somebody that is obviously intoxicated, are not breathalyzing people they come across in the harbor. But if somebody's not operating their equipment in the appropriate way, there seems to be some gross safety hazards, they're going to evaluate that person, see if their speech is in a normal pattern, if they exhibit any signs of possible intoxication, and then kind of take it from there. In general, I believe that there's probably alcoholic beverages that have been involved in these previous events, but there was no gross operator error in terms of patrolling the event, because our resources are completely committed to this thing, just going back and forth, keeping people out of that main channel, making sure people are staying where they are, trying to bring the biggest safety blanket we can to the event. But yes, unless somebody's distributing obvious signs of intoxication, we're not breathalyzing the crowd.
And do you staff up extra for the event so that if there's a normal emergency somewhere, you can respond, or does the unit just pull away and go handle the emergency?
It depends on the size and scope. As described in this event, we wouldn't staff up, and we haven't staffed up because a lot of these have been impromptu. Like, we didn't know it was going to happen until maybe an hour or two before, when some of our Harbor Patrol and Marine Enforcement personnel got updated. If it was a large scale event, we would upstaff and we would charge the party holding the event the cost of bringing in those personnel. That is one of the really important things in our partnership between the Harbor Patrol and Marine Enforcement unit is they're probably not both going to get a call at the same time. So when one leaves, one can kind of take over and be a more aggressive enforcer of the safety elements, and then keeping people out of the main channel, preventing people from side tying and stuff like that. That was some of the challenges this fall and winter, is that they would get a tow at the harbor entrance and then move away, and then all these people basically drop anchors in bad places, and then there's a real problem down there when they come back. And by that time, there's already 15 boats in the wrong spot, and it's really hard to move 15 boats out of the way.
Yeah. Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Cool. Commissioner Carlson.
Thanks. So just to clarify, I think you said this was only tried once so far with the Portofino opening day?
Port Royal opening.
Sorry,
and actually
Port
the
Royal,
idea
yeah.
of moving it to the mooring field, like it was kind of, this didn't come from our office. It was like, it's great. Those moorings are underused. It kind of spreads everybody else out and it moves everybody away from that giant sandbar down there.
Yeah. So you haven't had any other feedback on it yet. And we're missing a row of moorings now, right? So there's only about a dozen moorings available in that area?
I believe there's 16 moorings as part of that field.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically I'm just curious to see how this goes when it actually gets tried out, because that's a lot fewer boats and a different layout and stuff. Just curious to see how people like it. But, you know, hey, you got to try something. So, you know, I really appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah, Port Royal actually did a good idea. They moored their large vessel on the commercial moorings down there, and then did like a dinghy line from the larger vessel to one of the smaller vessels. So the smaller dinghies, the paddle boards, all those smaller vessels could kind of tie up to that. It still provided great access for our marine enforcement and harbor patrol unit, allowed more accommodation of people. I mean, my concern in going into this summer is that we're going to end up like with hundreds of boats in that sandbar area, all just dropping anchor all over the place, and that it's going to be very hard for us to provide our safety blanket to that community if that's the case. So
yeah, you probably will anyway, because it's, you know, such a pleasant area to run around in.
Yeah.
And just curious, do you happen to know what $1 million in liability insurance costs?
So
I'm
I
just
do
curious,
actually,
what would it cost to, you know, put on one of these things now?
You know, I'm not really sure. That's kind of out of my scope of practice. And just as an overhead announcement for everybody, that's the standard insurance waiver for anybody that works or does anything in the city. So people that teach tennis lessons up at Alta Vista are required to carry $1 million in liability insurance. All of our contractors that work in the city that's kind of the standard, and it's not some number we made up as part of this process. That's the standard. Anybody working?
I know, I've heard it before. Yeah.
So, again, we just carried it over from that other process. So, Port Royal, Craig Alsop and Craig, they pulled $1 million worth of insurance for the concert. So we're trying to be very reasonable. We can't affect that part of it. Again, it's a no cost. As long as they're not charging for the event, it's a no cost application for us. It just allows us to prepare for the event and make sure there's some sort of organization.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that you're trying something.
Of course.
Thanks.
Commissioner Callahan?
Yes, I am familiar with the $1 million liability for a party. There's one company that does it. That's all they do. We use them at Redondo Beach Yacht Club. We have a $500,000 liability. It's about $125 to $150. Once you get to a $500,000, it's not much more for the extra $500,000. And I also wanted to know, if a yacht club has a raft up, is that going to be required? Are you going to require the application as well?
Can you describe the event better to me? I'm unfamiliar with that.
For many years, King Harbor Yacht Club has had, exclusive of COVID, has had a New Year's Day or where we all go out and we raft up and pass hors d'oeuvres around, and everybody has a glass of champagne and we celebrate something that's happening. So, you know, we're looking at 25, 30 little dinghies all connected together in a ring.
If you wanted to follow the letter of the law, I think that, yes, this would be something that would be provided to you at no cost. But you know, again, it's whether you're creating problems and complaints in the system, which I can guess that as a regular event probably doesn't generate a ton of complaints.
Right.
And again, this is our enforcement tool. So if you're not following the rules, this is our way of saying, like, there's a pathway to do this correctly and you're not doing it.
Sure.
So bad things are going to happen. So,
Okay, well, I'll pass that on. Thank you.
you're welcome. Commissioners, any other additional questions? Well, it's a pleasure to get to present to you tonight. I'm very excited to meet all of you, and thank you for the good questions and vetting the process a little bit further. I appreciate it.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. So, Sergeant Sabian, let's give it a whirl. Let's see how see if the microphone issues have resolved themselves.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
You got me? All right, my presentation is going to be up, Jason.
Oh,
So I do have our
Nope, it's crackling.
I'm sorry. A little closer, does that help? No?
Try, let's see. Maybe a little
All
closer.
right.
Let's see.
I'm going to get right up on my computer here. All right, from January to April, our quarterly stats, dispatch calls for service, they're 535. Our self-initiated activity, there are 224. Field interview cards, it's 20. Reports, 101. Citations at 63. Arrests at 40. And general assists at 225. Were you guys able to hear me? No?
Yeah, I think we've sort of picked it up. It's kind of a little bit off and on, but yeah.
You got it? Okay, I'm sorry. Is there any questions for me? Anything I can answer for you? My intermittent connection.
So I think he was asking if any of the commissioners maybe have any questions of the Marine Enforcement Unit. Recognizing that our audio is breaking up, we may not be able to dive into too deep on this particular call, but if there's some questions that you wanted to ask, maybe we can see if we can get enough audio out of it to answer those. Chair Light, you do have a request from Commissioner Carlson.
Go ahead, Roger.
Yeah, I was wondering what the process is for the boat that's abandoned in the north end. Like, if you were to impound a car, how long would it take you to dispose of a car if you had a car you took over and needed to sell? Is it
I'm sorry?
2 years, 3? Let's say you impound a car and a car is abandoned on a city street and you take it over and you put it in an impound yard and eventually you claim it, sell it at auction, whatever you do. What do you do with a car?
A car, it's a lot easier. It's mobile. There's a tow truck. It's a boat's a little more challenging. A car, it can be counted, within 30 minutes. It's a little bit more challenging with a boat.
I can give you the name and number of contacts in Long Beach Harbor who can tell you how to dispose of a boat just like a car. And maybe we can do something about that boat in the north end of the harbor.
I'll welcome it.
Great.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Appreciate the job both of you do out there and your teams. Can I get a motion to receive and file the reports? Did we get a motion? Okay, thank you. Second?
Second.
Second.
Okay, anybody opposed? Okay, thank you very much.
All right, next on your agenda tonight is the discussion and possible action regarding the Harbor Commission input related to the City of Redondo Beach proposed fiscal year 2021-22 budget and fiscal year 21 through 26 capital improvement program. I am going to now share my screen. Hopefully this will work for me as well. And there we go. I trust you're able to now see my screen.
Yes.
Yep.
All right. Perfect. So very similar to what we did last year, I wanted to take you through a short PowerPoint presentation, talk about some of the highlights of the budget for the upcoming year. And really, as we did last year, solicit your input on some of the decision packages that are out there, as well as some of the amendments that have been made to the capital improvement program. You're at the beginning of the budget cycle. The city council got the budget distributed to them in May. They were to have their first couple of public hearings last night, which they did. And I will tell you, they were at an extremely late hour, probably about 1 o'clock in the morning. So they were very short public hearings. They basically opened the public hearings to receive the information and then continued the public hearings to their June 8th meeting. They have 2 more meetings on the budget, which would be June 8th and June 15th. Since they didn't have a lot of discussion tonight, there is a possibility, I won't say for certain they're going to do this, but they could also hold it over and have an additional meeting on the 22nd of June if they needed to. So you do have, by having your meeting here on June 2nd, you have ample opportunity to craft some input and recommendations if you so choose to distribute to them for their consideration as they go through their budget deliberations. Just as a reminder, and this is a pretty simple overview, but the Harbor Enterprise, which is really the enterprise fund that is comprised of the Uplands and Tidelands Fund, is what our department really has control over and authority over. I will tell you there are a lot of departments that draw from our enterprise fund for maintenance activities, for public safety activities. Frankly, our department probably draws the smallest amount of money out of our own department. But the Harbor Enterprise is comprised of the Uplands and the Tidelands. The Tidelands funds, as most of you know, are more restrictive in terms of what you can use them for, whereas the Upland funds have a little more flexibility in terms of their use for various activities. What we'll talk about tonight is our budget, which really reflects the revenues and expenditures that are attributable to the Harbor Enterprise. So those are our leasing revenues, our sanitation fees that we collect, Seaside Lagoon entrance fees, and then any expenses that are attributed to the enterprise. What we don't collect in our department, in what goes into the city's general fund, are the revenue sources that are things like sales taxes, transient occupancy taxes or bed taxes, hotel taxes, they use different names, possessory interest tax or property tax. Those are one and the same as it relates to the harbor. Those flow into the city's general fund and are used for general fund purposes and are not available to us to offset the expenses of the enterprise itself. As I talked to you about last year, so you may recall last year as we had this conversation in June, we were a couple of months into COVID. We weren't exactly sure what was going to happen over the upcoming year, how long COVID would last. I don't think any of us at that time thought we'd still be talking about it a year later. And so we had to construct some kind of a revenue model to take into consideration the impacts. So that year, and again this year, we went back to our last full year of revenue that we had, which was calendar year 2019. So that's our best baseline that we can operate from in terms of trying to run some sensitivity analyses for various scenarios. So what we did for this year's revenue assumptions is we based them on the following assumptions. And, this is almost as good as anybody's guess, I suppose, and you could probably quibble that they may be too conservative or they may be too aggressive, but what we assumed is that we're still coming out of COVID. We're not 100% sure exactly how the populace is going to react, how they're going to, come out and support business. We're not 100% sure what opening on June 15th really means. A couple of us were having this conversation right before the meeting started. Will there still be some kind of restrictions in place, occupancy restrictions in place? The message we're getting is no, that everyone will be able to kind of go back to their original occupancy restrictions, but that's from the state. LA County could do something more restrictive. They certainly have that opportunity. So we're not 100% sure how the economy and particularly the waterfront area is going to respond post-COVID. So these were the assumptions that are built into our revenue model. And why these are important and why we focus on the sales, as most of you know, our leases are generally structured around a concept that is either the tenant pays a base rent or they pay a percentage of gross sales, whichever is greater. And for most of our tenants over the years, they've moved away from the base rent model and their gross sales typically exceed what they would pay in their base rent. And so in order for us to run our sensitivity analysis and figure out what our revenue assumptions would be, we really focus on their gross sales and would they see some reduction in that, which in turn would reduce the rent that they pay to the city. So as I started to say, for retail and restaurant, we're assuming that they would be at 65% of their 2019 calendar year revenue or a 35% reduction in sales. Same for parking. Hotel rooms are interesting. We had a conversation with the revenue manager for the Portofino Hotel. We talked to Crown Plaza, which are the two big properties in the harbor. We don't get rent from the Crown Plaza, but it was instructional in terms of thinking about how some of the other properties in the harbor might respond post-COVID. Portofino, while they're seeing good occupancy from weekenders, from people who are driving from the inland areas to come out to the shoreline, come out to the beach and enjoy it on the weekends, what they're not seeing, and they don't think they'll see a recovery on for a while, is their group business, the business travelers, the group business, and some of their larger social events. Not sure exactly when people are going to feel comfortable starting to host larger social events. They're thinking that it's probably going to be mid-2022 to late 2022 before they see some of that group and small convention business returning to their property. So we're still looking at a prediction from our perspective of a 50% reduction in sales, and that's somewhat supported by some of the information we've heard from a couple of the properties. We don't have much in terms of residential or office, so we're just showing a small reduction in rental income from them. Likewise for marina slips, a fairly small reduction in slip rental income. Again, we're not sure that we're going to see a huge impact on those areas as it relates to COVID. Most of you know also that one of the things that we have been doing throughout COVID is we have been offering rent deferral to any tenant that contacts us and lets us know they're having COVID-related impacts on their businesses. So that's something that the city council has been offering to our tenants. What we've done is we've just accounted for that deferral. We've built it up and have an accounting of it. And then we, with our master tenants and our property managers, with some of our smaller tenants, have established rent repayment schedules. And so what most of the tenants are doing right now is they are starting to repay their rent and will hopefully make it through the repayment of their backlog by the end of this upcoming fiscal year. So we're hoping by this time next year, June 30 of 2022, most of that deferred rent has been paid back to the city at that point. We probably will still have some hangover at that point from some of our larger tenants. Portofino Hotel has a fairly sizable rent deferral. That might take them 18 months to burn that off as opposed to 12 months. But we're certainly looking at a 12 to 18 month window to recoup all of those rent deferrals that the city has granted to various tenants. I've mentioned this in the past. We have not waived any rent as it relates to COVID. So we have not provided any reductions in rent. We haven't abated any rent. The city has been strictly operating off of a deferral program where we allow them their rent to accrue in their account, and then we just allow them to pay that off on a rent repayment schedule over time. We don't have, to be perfectly candid, we don't have a lot of enforcement tools at our disposal right now because of eviction restrictions and other kinds of safeguards that have been put in place, appropriately so, during COVID to protect tenants. So right now, if a tenant still has a COVID-related issue, they can let us know and still get that deferral. That remains in place, and it's unclear to us how long that will continue to remain in place. So with all of that said, let me give you our 2021-2022 snapshot here for where we are on the two different funds. So, and this is the information that you will also find in the budget in what we call the financial summaries. Some people call them mini financials, but this is the snapshot that appears in that pages, and that was attached to your administrative report as backup. But we thought we'd bring it onto this page to show you where we are. So for rents and percentages, we are starting to show an increase in rents and percentages. The way my screen is set up, you all are blocking some of my numbers. Hold on, let me move you over here. So we are starting to show, an increase in rents and percentages. And what we'll see happen is for any rent that we collect in the months of July and August, that is rent that's been deferred, that will get booked as part of our 2021 revenues. So we have a pile of rent deferral. Anything that gets paid to bring down that pile of rent deferral owed that's paid in July and August will get booked for our current fiscal year. And then anything that is remaining that gets paid in September through the end of June of next year will be revenue that counts in our 2021, 2022 revenue numbers. Okay, so you're seeing an increase in our revenues, even though our assumptions are somewhat the same. Our revenue is growing because we're going to see some of that rent deferral money paid back to us as part of next year's budget. Parking structure revenue, we've kept relatively the same. We're seeing a large reduction in the Seaside Lagoon entrance fees. They're going to be operating on a much shorter abbreviated season this year. Investments earnings, they're predicting the same. Our sanitation fees are roughly the same. Some increase in other revenue, but the real lion's share of what we're expecting to see as our increase this year is really related to rents and percentages and recouping some of the deferred rent that we've been waiting to capture. On the expenditure side, there's an increase on personnel. And I should say this, these numbers are all before the decision packages are considered by the city council. So if the city council accepts the decision package, you'll see some of these numbers change, and I'll show you that on a slide that's coming up. Maintenance and operation has gone down a little bit, $225,000. We've seen a small decrease in internal service funds and overhead, and then property tax in lieu fees are roughly the same as what they've been. So we are seeing a reduction in our expenses, an increase in our revenues, so that's helping us overall. But the big number to really focus on here is we're still in a fairly significant operating loss position of about $1.5 million. And again, that's before decision packages. That number will change and it will go down, as you'll see on an upcoming page. For the first time, I didn't put this on last year's slides, but I wanted to show it to you on this year's slide what our beginning fund balance was and what our current beginning fund balance is. And what you see on the Tidelands is you've seen our fund balance shrink from 7.3 million to $5 million. And that's in part due to our structural deficit that we had last year. It's in part due to the fact that we have received less revenue than we thought we were going to get last year. COVID certainly went longer and was more protracted than what we thought it would be. We had much more in terms of rent deferral. So some of that is being also impacting our fund balance at the moment. So you're seeing that reduction in our fund balance where it's shrinking that $2.3 million down. We have a structural deficit this year again. We'll see a further reduction in the fund balance as a result of that structural deficit, and that will continue until that gets corrected. On the Uplands side, almost virtually the same snapshot for the most part is you have an increase in revenues related to the deferred rent repayments. Parking structure revenue, we think it's going to roughly stay about the same. Parking meter fees, some of these other revenues or sources are fairly small, investment earnings, storage fees, things of that nature. The real big number here is rents and percentages. On the expenditure side, same type of profile, slight decrease in personnel and maintenance operations. We do see an increase in internal service fund allocations for this particular fund, but a decrease in overhead. So, and then our debt service, as you would expect, is roughly the same from year to year. That's our debt service for the lease acquisitions that the city engaged in years gone by. So a much smaller operating loss, but still an operating loss in the Uplands account. What's particularly troubling in this account, which you'll see at the very bottom line, is for the first time, we're in a negative position in our fund balance for the Uplands account. So we're at a negative $3,700. So we're essentially at zero right now in terms of our fund balance. And again, same issues are impacting our fund balance. Structural deficit from last year, we were able to reduce it with some of the decision packages, and then also not realizing the same amount of revenue that we would normally realize as a result of COVID. So we knew this going into the year last year that we were going to be relying on our fund balances to try to get us through COVID and the COVID related impacts. And given that we didn't have a big fund balance to start with in the Uplands Fund, it's not surprising that we've largely exhausted those available proceeds to us and that we're essentially sitting at a zero position in that account right now. So here are the decision packages that are under consideration for this year. I'm trying to figure out how to move. the sidebar with all of your pictures, I have to kind of move it around a little bit on my screen here. Here we go. That'll help me read everything. So there are 8 decision packages that have a potential to impact that operating loss. So at the top of the page, you see the operating loss that was carried forward from those previous slides, 1.558 million in the tidelands, roughly $1 million in the uplands. And then you see the proposed decision packages that are under consideration by the city council. And these are certainly things that if you have thoughts or comments that you want to transmit to them, you're certainly free to do that. The first 2 are a freeze on positions, and that's really the same freeze that we had last year. So this looks very much like it did last year, where the police department in decision package number 21 is freezing a vacant community services officer position. And then the public works department is freezing 3 positions within their harbor enterprise budget. And that's resulting in some salary savings that you see reflected here, roughly $90,000 between tidelands and uplands for police department, and another $125,000 or $225,000 for public works. Decision package 23 is a reduction in harbor enterprise contracts. We talked about this last year. We actually took a much bigger reduction last year in our contracts and professional services account. So we are restoring some of that funding back into our account, but we still are proposing $150,000 reduction in contracts and professional services for the harbor enterprise. And that is related to really 4 primary contracts. We typically allocate some money for appraisal services, so we've eliminated that or are proposing to suspend that for a year. We typically allocate some funding for auditing of our existing contracts, so we're proposing suspending that for a year. Since I've been here and for years prior, we have had what we call a parking ambassador program. We have a company that's called Laz Parking Services that has parking ambassadors down in the garage. We have suspended that program for this year. And then we also are making, and so those are the 3 contracts and professional services contracts that are being suspended. And then we are taking a reduction of roughly a third in what we have for marine engineering. And that's not marine engineering services related to our capital improvement project. So this is just additional funding that's been available to our department should we need any additional marine engineering services during the course of the year. Our core budget for that is $75,000. It'll just shrink to $50,000. Frankly, because of all the work we do on the contract, on the capital improvement program, we generally don't have a lot of additional need for marine engineering services as a department. But we always like to have a little funding available for that should something crop up that we need services for. So those reductions amount to $150,000. You split them evenly between tidelands and uplands, and that's where you see decision package 23. Decision package 24 is a good news item. We have finally paid off our Department of Boating and Waterways loan that we've had on our books for a long time, probably coming up on 30 years. And so that service payment that was part of our tidelands account is now going away. And that's $415,000 that now can be put back into the fund and is not being used to service the debt on the D-ball loan. So that's a good news item. The fire department administrative support staff, fairly low number. It's about $30,000. They're reorganizing their administrative support staff. And because some of that staff was charged out to tidelands and uplands, we will see some of that savings accrue to our account. So those first, 5 items are really cost savings to the department, and they help reduce our operating losses. What we have proposed as a decision package to spend money on, as you know, is our King Harbor's amenities plan preparation. And that's about $300,000 that we have budgeted. I'll tell you in my director's report kind of where we are on a status update. We have received 5 proposals, and I think the $300,000 that we're proposing here is going to be sufficient to cover that work program. So I think that's good that we won't need any more than that to do that. There had been some conversations at the council level that once the amenities plan had been completed, that perhaps we should set aside some additional funding to advance the design for Seaside Lagoon. So what you see here, excuse me, is a placeholder number of $50,000. Ultimately, if that went to Seaside Lagoon or some other amenity that was ready to advance in the design phase, we could possibly use it for that as well. But the intent is, once the public amenities plan is completed, based on the schedule that you all have drafted, you would want that done within this upcoming fiscal year. That the next step would be to move to more advanced concepts for some of the amenities themselves. So this would provide $50,000 to advance the concept planning for Seaside Lagoon. The final line item is the city is expecting to have some COVID recovery funds allocated to it. And given the position of the Uplands Fund, the city has proposed as part of Decision Package 56 that $1 million of those COVID recovery funds be allocated back to the Uplands account to try to offset the operating loss that we have in that account. So when you take all these decision packages into consideration and you look at the pluses and minuses, what you see is the operating loss, the revised operating loss in the Tidelands shrinks by about $475,000, $480,000. And the operating loss in the Uplands is virtually eliminated. It's a small operating loss of about $8,600. And the bottom line just shows you that reduction in cost that results from the decision packages themselves. Moving from kind of the operating side to the capital side, what we wanted to do is give you an overview, and this chart largely comes almost exactly out of the CIP budget for the current year. What you see is a carryover column, and we'll go through these line item by item, and then what we have allocated for funding for the next 5 years. So line item number 1, harbor dredging. You all are very well aware of that. We are expecting that project will happen in the window of opportunity that we have in the spring of 2022. So I think that's when the window is, when we're not in the sea bass season. I believe it's the spring of 2022. So we have $2.3 million allocated to initiate that harbor dredging project in that window. We have an ongoing harbor railing replacement project. You may see that when you're out at the pier. Some of the railings have been pulled. They may have tape up. Some of them have been refurbished. You may see those out there. That's an ongoing program that we'd like to use the carryover funding plus some additional money this year to complete the railing refurbishment and replacement. The maintenance project on the pier, sales and lighting, that's funded, doesn't need any additional funding for this year. We always budget money for pier repairs. It's inevitable that every single year, we have bracing, we have piles, we have some kind of structural element within the pier that needs to be repaired. So we put a couple of $100,000 in. You see it happening every single year for the next 5 years. We have a little bit of money in for the pier parking structures. And remember, this is the Tidelands account. So this is the plaza parking structure. So it's not as in rough a shape as the pier parking structure. They're backwards in terms of the way you think about them, but so that's why this number is fairly small. You'll see a different number on the next page. We have ongoing work that we do for restrooms, the boat ramp design and construction. If we get through the public amenities plan this year and we have that location nailed down, we have funding for 2022-23 program for about $4.5 million. We've talked about this in the past. This is certainly something that we would be going out and chasing grant funding for, looking for Department of Boating and Waterways monies and other sources to construct the boat ramp. So I would expect that money as we get closer to implementation to hopefully bring that dollar amount down. Likewise for the sport fishing pier, we pushed that out a little bit. Again, waiting for the public amenities plan to kind of work its way through. That's also something we could look for grant funding for as well. Most of you know we have money for Moonstone Park that came to us through the Chevron moving some large coker drums through the harbor. That still sits in our carryover account. And most of you also know, because you've approved this, the Harbor Patrol dock work is underway to do those replacements of the Harbor Patrol docks. The only new project that we have that was added to the Tidelands CIP program for this year is the replacement of the hand launch dock. As you know, we took that facility out of the water this year. The repairs to it were much more extensive than we thought they would be. It's now back in the water, but our public works folks aren't so sure that the next time we take it out that it's going to lend itself well to just a repair and patch, that we may be in a position where we ultimately need to replace that. Now, a lot of this has a direct relationship to the public amenities plan, and this is certainly one of those items where there'll be some conversation about, do we want to do a hand launch? Do we want it to be the same type of hand launch? We've had conversations and suggestions that there could be a zero depth entry launch idea. So I think depending on where we go on the public amenities plan, you may see this item change, but we wanted to get a placeholder in here just so that we could have funding available to do the work to replace it if necessary. But that's the only new item that you should see on this list. If you were to go back and look at, previous years' capital improvement plans, I think you would see that they're fairly consistent in terms of the projects that are being contemplated. For the uplands, again, it's very similar on the top half. Basin 3 seawall work, Basin 3 slip replacement work, all happening in the next year or two. So we would do some design work on the slip replacements and then hopefully have funding available to us to do the Basin 3 seawall and Basin 3 slip replacements. Remember, this is a fund now that currently has a zero balance associated with it. So the capital improvement work here is going to be much more challenging for us than it is going to be on the Tidelands account. This is where you see the actual parking structures, the larger pier parking structure. So you see some money this year to design the next set of improvements, which would be next year. So what we have typically done for the pier parking structure is every other year, we've put in about $1.2 million to continue the refurbishment and work on the pier parking structure. And then on those off years, we do a little bit of the design work that then takes us to the next year's implementation program. Restroom improvements, just like on the Tidelands, we have uplands restroom improvements that need to occur, sea level rise improvements that need to occur. The boat launch itself, there's just a little bit of funding here. It's really not an uplands project unless for some reason it gets located in a space where there would be some need to fund some uplands work, but that's some small carryover money. These last two items are for the uplands, the two new capital improvement items that are being proposed for this year for approval. The first is the Redondo Beach Marina parking lot pay stations. So as part of last year's budget, one of the things that we wanted to do was to take people out of the booth at the Redondo Beach Marina parking lot. It's very expensive for us to have that booth manned with a live body for people to go through that gate and come back out again. So I'll be candid and tell you, I thought this was going to be a much easier effort than it's turned out to be. I kind of thought we'd stick some pay stations out there, we'd paint some numbers on the parking stalls, and that'd be the end of it. But there's a lot more involved with it in terms of path of travel issues to get people to those pay stations, creating some improvements into the parking lot itself. It turned into from what I thought was going to be more of a maintenance project into a much bigger effort. And so in order to give it the attention it needs, my recommendation was that we put it on the capital improvement program so that we can actually get that work completed and start to realize those savings of not having to have somebody man the booth at the entrance to the Redondo Beach Marina parking lot. What we did this year, and you may have noticed if you go down there frequently, is during the really slow months of December, January, and February, some weekends we had no one there. Then we started bringing people in on the weekends, and then we slowly phased them into 7 days a week of having somebody in the booth as we got closer to summer. So that was how we tried to manage the cost, but we'd really like to move it to a fully automated system in the same way that we have both of the parking structures set up. The very last item is some of you will know where this is, but there's a little park above the International Boardwalk. People refer to it as Turtle Park. And there is a place that is there that is really deteriorated and needs to be replaced. And so as part of a broader citywide effort to replace some of the play surfaces, we'd like to replace the play surface at Turtle Park, and we're estimating that that's about a $20,000 project. So those are the two new projects. You do see a little bit of money now being kicked out to 2022, 23, 24. And that's really a reflection of the fact that the Uplands Fund is struggling with fund balance and having resources available to manage the capital improvements that are starting to pile up on us. So we're going to be challenged to kind of think through how we get some of these things done in the out years and address that structural deficit. Obviously, once the effects of COVID have worn off, which hopefully that will be over the next fiscal year, we'll see more revenue again coming in. And then we'll have to assess where we are on the position in the fund and see how we can start to bring in some revenues to address some of these capital improvements that are out on the horizon for the Uplands Fund. So our recommendation tonight is for you to discuss and perhaps take possible action to provide input or recommendations to the City Council on the budget and the capital improvement plan. And then as a secondary item, simply receive and file our report on the fiscal year 21-22 budget and capital improvement plan. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen. If I can figure out, here we go. Let's see. I've moved this bar around so many times. Here we go. Your screen sharing. All right, I've stopped sharing my screen. I can bring that up at any time if you need to go through that. But I think that's largely what we wanted to talk about. I think the only other thing I would mention is as I looked at the presentation tonight, as I was getting ready for the meeting, I went back to just see what we have in deferred rent, what our totals in deferred rent are. So just to give you some perspective, our deferred rent for Pier Plaza, International Boardwalk, and the Redondo Beach Marina, which are the three properties that Leonardo Property Management manages for us, is about $875,000. So we have about $875,000 sitting out there in deferred rent on those three areas. And then from the rest of our larger leasehold areas, so Portofino Hotel, Cheesecake Factory, some of the bigger master leaseholders, we have about another $1.4 million in deferred rent. So our current deferred rent total is roughly $2.3 million that's sitting out there in monies owed to the Harbor Enterprise Fund. So, like I said, we'll book some of that this year, whatever comes in over the next couple of months, and then the remainder of that will get booked as part of our 2021-2022 revenues going forward. So with that, I think I've talked enough. I can tell I'm losing my voice a little bit. Happy to take any questions you have while I grab a sip of a beverage here.
And a fine choice of beverage it is. On the restaurant revenue, did you consider the fact that, if we extend the deck dining and everything opens up, there could be additional revenues, both from a lease perspective and from a, sales tax and revenue perspective?
Yeah, now we don't get the sales taxes. So that would flow to the city. There could be some additional lease revenue that would flow out of the gross sales of that space. The challenge we just have, to be candid, is we just don't know how open they're going to be able to be on the indoors. Everybody is saying June 15, June 15, June 15, we're going to open with no restrictions, but we don't know. And so It could be that you get high usage in the outdoor space because people are comfortable sitting there. We have nice weather. And the indoor space isn't used as robustly, either because of restrictions or just people would rather sit outside. So, is that 35% the right number or not? I don't know. We're
maybe upside in the budget. So
I think that's where we would rather be. You're dead on. We'd rather undershoot it a little bit and be pleasantly surprised that we have some additional revenue, say come mid-year when we look and see where we are, than to, undershoot it and have even, a bigger structural deficit.
Yeah, I just sense people are pretty pent up and want to get out, and so we may be surprised. Is there anything in this for the Beach Life Festival revenue bump?
So we don't get the Beach Life Festival revenue to the city is very small. I mean, we get a facilities fee that they pay us for use of the space for the festival days, but that's the only revenue that we collect from Beach Life Festival itself.
And does that go to the Tidelands and the Uplands?
The facilities fee would be split because they have property in both areas. That fee is really just a reflection of the loss of the parking area. That's kind of what they get charged for.
Right. What I'm asking is, it doesn't go to the general fund. It goes back into the harbor.
No, that facilities fee should go to the Tidelands and Uplands for use of the space.
Okay. Let's see. In general, I support the budget packages. I still think I'm amazed that the ISF is going up in the one case, given everything else that's going on and the amount of structural deficit. I think I would ask the city council to look at reducing the ISF to the harbor, because I think we're already out of whack with the other harbors, and it just continues to build a structural deficit. I think it's the wrong time to do that. The Seaside Lagoon concept plan, why can't that be in the CIP? We do other design, in the CIP. So why is Seaside Lagoon in the?
Yeah, good question. When I had a long conversation with our assistant city manager, Mike Witsansky, and we kind of went back and forth whether we set it up as a CIP. We don't really have a CIP project yet for it. It could be that once we get through the public amenities plan and there's more of a sense of what the project is, that maybe that design money goes along with the project. Honestly, it was just a choice. We could have stuck at either location, and we decided we just put it in contracts and professional services. It hits our fund balance either way. So if it's in the CIP account and we spend it on design, we're still paying for it out of Tidelands or Uplands. And if it goes in our contracts and professional service account, we pay it if it goes Tidelands or Uplands. So it didn't have much of an impact initially on where we put it, but it's a fair question, and you could make an argument that it could have gone in either location, and we actually had some debate about which was the right place to put it and just settled on that location. But there wasn't any real, sense that it had to be there. It could be its own capital improvement project. I will say that the council hasn't considered it yet. They may very well say, because it's part of a decision package, that we don't, maybe that's not really something we want to allocate this year, but they could have made that decision as part of a capital improvement or contracts and professional services. So I don't have a great answer other than to tell you we looked at both locations and just kind of had to pick one.
I'm kind of the opposite. I think as we get done with the amenities plan, I think a lot of us here have expressed the desire to move out quickly, and, pushing it off another year when we could be moving forward is kind of, disheartening to me, because we've been sitting on the harbor as is long enough, and I think there's a general move that the public would like that they see things move forward. So I'd like to see more things pulled to the left from starting, once the amenities plan is done, start putting things in motion for design and things like that. And personally, I think Seaside Lagoon should be its own project, and it should be in the CIP budget. I mean, it's naive to think eventually something's going to be done with it. Either a developer's going to do it or we're going to do it. It's going to be a project, and we can always write it off if it's part of a developer's program. Likewise, on the boat ramp, I'd like to see that pulled left, but I understand we'd have to write for grants and really can't. But I believe that there's some money that has to go into writing the grant. I believe you have to have some design or concept for it to go forward, and I'd like to see that money pulled to the left so we can get on applying for grants, as soon as possible. The hand launch, I agreed with your statement. If we're going to do anything to the hand launch, first off, we should wait for the amenities plan, because it may be, we may be moving it. But if we are going to replan it, with that place not being dredged and the amount of wear and tear on it, I think we ought to look at going to zero depth entry because once you put that in, that's low maintenance. I was a little confused on the restrooms, and maybe I'm thinking I have the Tidelands and Uplands backwards, but the ones that are on International Boardwalk need work. Are those ones being funded?
So we've started, the first restrooms that we started with were the restrooms that were out on the pier, out on the Fisherman's Wharf Pier.
Right.
They were really, really rough, in rough shape. The Public Works Department is very soon going to be taking plans and specs to the city council to actually get those upgrades completed. We did a walkthrough with the Public Works Department. It's been a little while, but we did a walkthrough with them and looked at the restrooms that were over by where the Octagon building is. There's a series of restrooms over there. Those are in relatively good shape, but agreed that actually the ones that we think are the next worst and ones that we've actually had some issues with are the ones that are right next to Quality Seafood. There's a bank,
Yep.
restrooms, the ones I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Like they look like small little jail cells that are kind of right there. They're challenging because they're really difficult to make ADA compliant. And once we start touching them and start doing upgrades to them, those are probably the next ones that come up on our list. And then I would say behind that is the ones you're talking about on the International Boardwalk. So, Public Works kind of has a pecking order that I think they're starting to work through these restrooms on. And
But
design.
they're all bad. My wife won't use them.
Yeah.
I use them, but
Yeah. Trust me, when we get complaints about restrooms, almost inevitably, those are the ones that people complain about the most.
Okay, and the pay station for the marina, one of the things in Measure C was to start a program where boaters can get a frequent access for reduced cost, and I think this is a chance to potentially implement this. And also we used to have a reduced cost for if you're coming in with a kayak or an SUP, and I don't know how you implement that in an automated booth.
Yeah, we have had programs in the past where we're able to code. We can code certain things. So if somebody wanted to buy down the discount rate, maybe there's a way we can figure out a code that they enter for use. We'd have to give that one some thought on how you do that on the automated system.
Okay, and then the last item, it's still disconcerting to me that we're running a structural deficit, and yet, the TOT and sales tax from the harbor goes into the general fund, and we're paying ISF funds. I'd like the council to consider bringing the sales tax and TOT back into the harbor enterprise to help fund the structural deficit that's there. That's where the revenue is generated, and I think that's where we should get investment money to continue to improve and sustain it. Those are my things for consideration. I think, Vicki, you were the next hand. You're on mute. Still on mute.
Okay. I think Matt was next.
Okay, Matt.
You're on mute.
Yep, I know. I'm just unmuted now. Few comments first. Thank you very much for all that. It's a lot to digest. The idea of sales tax revenue and TOT tax revenue being taken from the general fund and put back to where it was generated, I totally get it. And it seems like double dipping to pay both internal service charges and then turn around and pay all the TOT and the sales tax back to the city. I just say as a practical matter, we can make the recommendation, not against it at all. But from a general fund perspective, they would have to lay off police officers. 60% of the budget is public safety from the general fund, and fire department's got constant manning. I don't know how you'd cut that. Bottom line is the ramifications of them taking that hit and taking that money back to the harbor enterprise funds. We make the recommendations, like I said, but the reality is it's not really going to change anything. One thing that I hope we can change is one of the decision packages that relates to COVID money. Talk about unequal allocation. If I remember correctly, we were talking that the city is estimating they lost about $5 million in revenue in, what did we say, 2020, 2021. And what is our revenue loss in the both Harbor Enterprise Prize funds put together? What we estimate our COVID losses are?
Well, we haven't estimated our COVID losses directly, but if you were to look at the operating losses for uplands and tidelands for the upcoming year, before decision packages would be 2.6 million. After decision packages would be roughly 1.1 million.
Does that
Yeah,
include
but it's so,
in the shoot, what do you call it, the savings or the what do you call it, the backup fees, or what'd you call it in there? It's the line below the negatives. Shoot, I got the wrong-
liabilities?
No. You showed that we went negative on the
The fund
upland-
balance?
Yes.
Yeah, the fund balance. So the fund balance would still be, after decision packages of this year, you'd have a fund balance of roughly, the Uplands Fund, if you took $1 million of the COVID recovery funds and put it in there, that would just about balance out the Uplands account for this year. So you'd basically still be sitting at more or less even when you got to the end of the year, but the Tidelands account would lose another $1.1 million.
Okay, my point simply is the COVID money came from the state to offset COVID losses. And just doing some real rough numbers, 1/3 of the losses of the city of Redondo Beach from all areas seems to be in the harbor. Like I said, just some rough math. The rough math tells me that the Harbor Enterprise funds should be getting 1/3 of the COVID money. At a minimum, they should be getting $2 million, not $1 million. We're getting the leftovers. We're getting the scraps. Well, there's the city council is looking at it and saying, well, they haven't said anything yet, but staff is proposing to them, let's fill in all the holes in the general fund in the city proper, and the leftovers can go to the harbor. And the math doesn't support that. The math supports doubling that. $2 million should be going to the Harbor Enterprise funds from the COVID money. I realize it's another thing like talking about TOT tax and sales tax revenue being put back in the Harbor Enterprise funds, but this one to me is even more obvious. The city has no inherent claims to that money other than in relationship to COVID losses, and the harbor was disproportionately impacted by COVID losses compared to the city. When you look at percentage of revenue lost, the harbor was disproportionately impacted and should be maybe not made whole, but a larger chunk of that $6.8 million coming from the state should be going directly to the Harbor Enterprise funds. So although I'm in support in general of the budget as it's been proposed, I really would like us to make a recommendation that COVID money be split proportionally to the impacts suffered by COVID. And it could be worded as simply as that. It should be proportional to the impacts, not just what's left over after the city gets hold of their money first. And yeah, I agree with regards to capital projects. I have never seen a capital project finish early or start early. If they're being pushed off to the right, they're going to get pushed off more to the right, as Chair Light was using the phraseology, and as opposed to the left. And that's just a general comment. I don't really my biggest fear, I've said it before and I'll repeat it again, is the pier parking structure falling apart and we don't have the money to replace it. So come to think of that, what happens when the uplands does go in the negative? It gets backfilled by the general fund, kind of like the landscaping and street lighting fund.
So I asked that question because you all asked me that question last year. And I asked that question to city management, and that was the answer I got, was that if it goes negative, it gets backfilled by the general fund.
So it's another reason why city staff, I mean, in their perfect world, all money would flow into one pot and they would be the benevolent, distributors of the funds as they saw fit. I mean, in any management person's perfect world, there wouldn't be all these separate funds. It would all just go into one pot and would be doled out according to their needs. Call it the benign, I don't want to use the C word, the communist word, but each according to their needs. That's not the fiscal reality, but that's where they would love to strive to get. And if they let the fund go negative, they're going to be given the money anyway. So they should be big about it and put the money where it belongs in the first place. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. Thank you all very much.
Okay, now Vicki.
Yeah, first of all, my heart goes out to all of the businesses that have struggled so hard to keep afloat. I just can't imagine how many obstacles they've had to hurdle. And I think anything we can do to help them is a responsibility we need to take. I like the budget. I know each department last year had to cough up 15% of their budget and eliminate 15%. It's difficult. I don't know when we're going to get back to normal, but the budget looks like a good working budget to me. Aside from the COVID distribution of funds, I don't have a lot of complaints. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay, Roger.
Thanks. Director, thanks a lot for preparing all this stuff and staff too. And I really appreciate you laying this out the same way from year to year. It makes it easy to follow. You guys made a lot of effort to present this stuff clearly a couple years ago, and I'm glad you did and stuck with it, and it makes it easy to follow. And also, thank you for giving us the training a couple years ago when I first started in how to look at the overall city budget on that online tool. And to the other new members of the commission, if you don't know how to do that, shoot somebody, shoot Director Proud an email or me or whoever, and you can dig in and see, everything going on with the city budget is really helpful when you have questions about this kind of stuff. My question, I hope, is pretty simple. Budget package 53, the King Harbor amenities plan preparation, $150,000. How does that relate to the other amenities plan money that you had found in other areas?
Yeah, so what we did, and I apologize, I'm not going to know the answer to this right off the top of my head. There were in the capital improvement budget that we had some design money that was set aside for the sport fishing pier. So if you look at the sport fishing pier line, oh, hold on, I don't have it up in front of you here. Let me share my screen here, 1 second. Share screen, here it is. Let me just grab this presentation again real quick. So I'm not gonna go to full screen. Hopefully you can see that. So if you look right here where it's sport fishing piers, there's no carryover and there's just implementation money out here, the $6 million implementation money, which, whether it belongs in 24, 25, or as Chair Light has suggested, it's a slide to the left, different topic. But we used to be carrying about $240,000 in design money for that. And so now you don't see any carryover on that at all. So that money is kind of flowing back into so even though there's a decision package to spend $300,000 of money, there is money that's being returned to the fund balance from some of the different pieces of design that were going on inside of the capital improvement plan. Does that make sense? And on the, I'm going to see if I can grab it for you right here. Remind me what that number was you said it was?
It's 150. So speaking in round numbers, I know there was 250 out there from the sport fishing pier and 150 now. So I'm curious if you think the amenities plan preparation is now roughly 400, or
No,
if this
it
is
won't
for
be-
some further.
No, it won't be 400. I can tell you the proposals that we've received already, it's not 400,000. Most of our proposals, I think 4 of the 5 proposals we received were sub 300. So I don't expect that we'll, that I think that will be enough to get us through the effort to do the plan. There's some dramatic change to scope of work as we're negotiating the final contract. I was just looking to find the decision package. Here we go. So what we wrote in here was down here. Is it up on my screen? Decision package 53. Can you see that?
No, we're looking at page 7, capital improvements.
Okay, let me screen share a different. I'm going to stop share. I'm going to screen share a different item here. This one. Now you can see decision package 53.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so down here, what we said was kind of toward the end, it says the cost to prepare the plan requires a budget allocation of $300,000 to the Harbor Enterprise Contracts and Professional Services account. The key sentence here is the funding is a one-time expense that will be equally split between Tidelands and Uplands. An equivalent reduction will be made to the Harbor Enterprise Capital Improvement Program to offset the proposed expense. So even though they're going to have to make a decision, the way that the city budget works is we get what's called a core budget allocation. And our core budget doesn't have $300,000 in it in our contracts and professional services account. So in order for me to get $300,000 in contracts and professional services account, a plus up on my core budget, I have to submit a decision package to the city council to make that happen. So what we're doing is we're correspondingly reducing the capital improvement program to eliminate some of those design monies that were associated with the sport fishing pier. And I think a little bit of money that was maybe in the Basin 3 area, and that will help offset that. So you'll see the fund balance grow a little bit. And then if they accept the decision package, you'll see it shrink a little bit. So that one is almost a cost neutral effort as far as the decision package is concerned. It looks like it's hitting us because you don't see the corresponding reduction in the capital improvement program.
Thanks. Okay, got it. That's my only question. Thanks a lot.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Tom?
Thank you, Chair Light. The first thing I wanted to say is I wholeheartedly endorse Commissioner Kilroy's math on the COVID-19 funds, and that we should be getting more of that, definitely. And also Chair Light's comments on the TOT and sales tax. It seems at some point we could at least make the effort to push that doesn't leave the funds. I did have a question, however, on decision package 56. It seems like in the text of that the math doesn't quite pen out right. I guess it's fine, but they're saying we're getting 6.8 million, but they're allocating about 1.8 more million dollars than that's being allocated, if I'm reading that right. It doesn't really matter, I suppose, but do you see what I'm talking about, Director Proud?
Yeah, and this isn't a decision package we wrote, so let me just take a look at it here. It's a $6.8 million in recovery funds, $3.4 million in fiscal year 2021, and another $3.4 million in 21-22. Authorization is requested to apply $2.4 million of the funds to the current year's expenses in the general fund, $1 million to the
Uplands,
and that math is, so that's.
And then 4.8 additional, which doesn't quite work.
So that's 2, 4, 6, 0.47, it's over 8 million.
Yeah, so if there's an additional, million,
Oh.
1.4 million, we should, it'd be great to see that in the Tidelands account.
All right, well, I'll definitely have to point, I mean, notwithstanding your potential recommendation that additional funding be given to the Harbor Commission, I do want to point this out because I do see the confusion. It looks as though these numbers to me, 3.47, looks like 8.2 million is what it adds up to.
Right.
And that should be corrected just as a general matter for the city council.
Right.
Decision package number 56, check math. I'll make sure they know about that. Okay, but I see your question. We'll raise that just globally, but I think separately you're talking about perhaps having notwithstanding some additional money of that being allocated to the Harbor Enterprise.
That's correct. And also to Chair Light's comments that moving some of this stuff to the left, especially if we say over or the Uplands Fund decreases less than zero, maybe some money will flow back to us somehow.
Yeah, got it.
But that's all I got.
Okay, Leslie?
Hey, I echo, thanks so much for the review. I echo Jim's comment about that none of the master plan effort that we're going to start soon appears, there's no expenditures for a while, nothing on Moonstone Park and the pier way out in 24. And we said we wanted to move fast, and the council said they wanted to move pieces fast. So I would definitely like to see some of that sooner. And maybe it's such that when this contract gets let, maybe we're automatically at the very end of 22. But
I think that's the timing that we were looking at is, I know you all want to try to move on roughly a 9-month or so cycle for the public amenities plan. At a minimum, having it done within this next fiscal year so that you'd be ready to start to move into implementation projects in the 22-23 fiscal year.
right.
So to the extent that the capital improvement plan can line up with that, I understand the comment. I do want to let you know, though, that on Moonstone Park, the money is in the carryover account. So that money has already been appropriated. It's sitting in a carryover account. So that is a work effort that could start, immediately, right? So once the plan has been approved, we have money sitting in a carryover account. That is money that could then be allocated to an implementation contract or, advance further design effort to get you to implementation on Moonstone Park. So that one is as far to the left as you can get it. When it's in the carryover column, you've
can
already
pull
got
the
money
trigger
that's
on
been
it
appropriated in
whenever?
previous years.
Okay. Okay, and so like below that Harbor Patrol docks, they've got 918 and they can just pull
Correct.
the trigger on it whenever, and it's allocated just for that. Okay.
That's correct. So they'll start that project. In fact, they're in final design and getting ready to go out to bid on actually doing the construction work on that because they have carryover money that's in the account, and then they'll have a small additional allocation to complete the job. And that also should be noted that that's, as you all know, that's the Harbor Patrol docks as well as the pump out station, right? So that's kind of both of those projects.
Right. Okay. And yeah, we don't want to fall flat on this 9-month effort that we're paying for. And I think to Jim's point about working on grants and next level, either detailed design or implementation, it seems like there's going to be elements of that we can start even in parallel. Maybe it doesn't happen until the 6-month mark of that, but as far as like grants and things like that. So I would expect, and I don't know how that appears in a budget in any of these line items, but it seems like that would be something, a small amount in the 21-22 for, staff supporting that kind of effort. I definitely echo the strong argument for allocating more of the COVID money. The harbor had a lot of additional challenges, especially the businesses and the restaurants on the pier. the math of 1/3 to the harbor is really a really good indirect way of getting the money like where it was meant to go, and also to help spur further revenue for the harbor, and could also go to things that residents are really, commonly commenting on or not wanting to go down, is, the dilapidated parking structure or the bathrooms. I see big chunks of money in here for those things that would be great to fast track, especially in the more visible, areas. I had a question on the Seaside Lagoon. It doesn't say enough in this design package 54, but I just wanted to make sure that 50K would be tied to the effort that is part of the master plan and wouldn't be competing with that.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
The idea is that once the master plan, it's kind of almost what you were just suggesting, is that as the master plan is really getting to its final stages, that you could ramp up a new contract just for Seaside Lagoon to kind of take the work in the master plan. So you've cited it, you figured out where it's going to be. Maybe you've done some basic design as part of the master plan. And that's the net money to kind of kickstart the next level of design leading up to an implementation project. So that's actually what I think it's almost directly in line with what I thought I heard you just saying.
Okay. Yeah, I just wasn't clear on that. Okay.
Yeah.
That's all the comments I had. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Roger?
Thanks. Yeah, I thought of another question. Sorry. So we've been discussing the federal coronavirus stimulus. Do we have any hint on what may be in an infrastructure package? Is there anything out there in another package that could come our way?
Yeah, I have not heard anything about an infrastructure package yet. There were some conversations that were going on with Congressman Liu's office regarding some potential grant funding. Not sure if we'll see any of that or not, but that's the only conversation that we've heard about that's related to infrastructure at this time. Once, if Congress gets their head around kind of a package that they can all, or enough of them can agree on to pass, then maybe there'll be something in there for, communities that we could tap into. But we don't have any inkling of what that might be at this point.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I didn't expect so, but I was curious. Thanks.
Yeah. I mean, the good news is, just to put a final note on that, is, the Liu's office in particular has been very communicative with the city in terms of trying to figure out where there may be some funding opportunities for us. So if those materialize, hopefully they'll have that same level of communication and, position us to take advantage of it.
Thanks. Well, time to send a postcard. Thank you.
Okay. No other hands? Leslie, is your hand back up? Okay. Well, I'd like to propose a motion. Let's see. First, I'd like the city staff to consider the following recommendations from the Harbor Commission. One, to consider reducing the ISF, the internal service fees to the harbor. Second, to make COVID funds proportional to the COVID losses, which would result in increases in the amount the harbor would get. And to consider retaining TOT and sales tax in the harbor enterprise. As to the budget packages, I'd like to recommend that broadly pulling all budget related to harbor amenities plan, the amenities in the amenities plan to the left, so we can act as soon as possible after we complete the amenities plan. That we establish Seaside Lagoon as its own CIP project, and that's where we allocate the monies that you've put in the budget for that. And that the pay stations solution be designed to comply with Measure C. And then finally, that the Harbor Commission supports the rest of the budget package and related recommendations. So can I get a second on that, or is a substitute motion?
I'll second that. I was taking notes and you got everything that I had taken notes on.
Okay, any discussion? Matt?
Yeah, so I agree with everything you said. My only question's got to do with Seaside Lagoon. And I only question it, or primarily question it, because I'm unsure as to what form the Seaside Lagoon is actually going to take. And I guess you mean some Measure C conforming water feature park, whether we call it Seaside Lagoon or whether it ends up becoming something else. You're really talking about whatever the amenities plan would actually end up doing.
Yes. Yeah, I'm only responding to that because he had it in the budget that way.
Right,
Seaside
fine.
Lagoon, so.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with everything. Thank you.
Okay, any other discussion on the motion?
So Chair Light, I guess I'm very clear on everything with the exception of one item, and I don't know if there's any way to add some clarity to it. So, and I can put the PowerPoint presentation back up if it'll help. On the capital improvement items that are related to the public amenities plan, say that 5 times fast, you want to see the implementation timeline accelerated. Do we want to look at any of those particular line items and make a suggestion, or do you want to just make it more as a global statement to say any CIP projects that are part of the public amenities plan accelerate implementation in the CIP?
I'd rather keep it that way and then let them figure out the specifics. And I don't mean for all of it to go left, but some portion get it started.
Got it. Okay. That was my only question. Thank you.
Okay, so any other discussion on the motion? Okay, I'd like, Stephen, could you run a roll call vote, please?
Sure.
Sorry, hold it, Tom had something.
Yeah, real quick, and I was trying to get on I think it's really imperative that we move quickly to get the automated parking going for the marina parking to eliminate that drain on that, So I wasn't sure about I don't know how big a deal it is in the automated parking to implement what's in Measure C to allow for the discounts.
I don't think we'd have to just look at that. I think it's more of an operational issue probably for us, and there may be some ways that we can program the machines. The pier and plaza parking structures do have, like Cancer Support Group had a reduced parking rate to provide code to their patrons to make that happen. I'm not too troubled that that's going to be the real hang up. Frankly, I think the design work and the engineering work is probably going to be the bigger issue than it is for us to figure out the operational component related to the compliance with Measure C. It sounds like it's more just kind of the setting up the pay structure correctly, and more than it is anything related to kind of a hardware or a public improvement component.
Okay, thank you.
And just as a note, I mean, we have done a lot of work on that because we thought it was going to be a maintenance project this year. So I expect that project will move quicker than some of the other ones will on its own.
That's great. Good to hear.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'd like to get a roll call vote.
Roll call vote, and again, I'll take you in the order you're on my screen. Commissioner Krazan.
Aye.
Commissioner Callahan.
Yes.
Commissioner Carlson.
Yes.
Commissioner Bauer.
Yes.
Commissioner Kilroy.
Yes.
Commissioner Walters.
Yes.
And Chair Light.
Yes.
Okay, so that's a 7-0 in favor of that. So what I can do is draft it.
I'm sorry, Stephen, go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is we do want to submit this to the city council. Do you want to nominate? We can draft up what the motion was. Do you want to have anybody on the Harbor Commission review it, or are you comfortable with us sending the recommendation that was part of your motion on its own?
I think this one's pretty explicit. I'm comfortable.
Okay.
But, I defer that to other commission members if you think we need to review it.
No.
Okay, well then we'll draft those recommendations up and we'll try to get those to them for their We'll probably, yeah, I think we can certainly draft them up. We're on a 3-day work week for us this week. It's kind of a little strange. So I'm not sure if we get it in the packet tomorrow because I'm not sure what time the packet goes out, but we could probably blue folder it for the 8th is probably what will happen. So that's likely the way we would transmit that to them. We may be able to send it separately on the 7th. I just don't know yet.
Okay.
Okay.
And then separately, I'd like to entertain a motion from anyone to receive and file
Please, thank you.
all the products that we just reviewed.
So
Did
moved.
we have any
A second.
public
Yeah, I was
comments?
going to ask that next. I realized
Good question.
done.
We do not have any attendees right now, and let me just check to see if there are any e-comments.
Where's Mark Hansen?
Yeah.
I don't know where Mark is. Oh, Mark sent a very last minute email here. Hold on. At 6:15. He sent it to Elizabeth and I, so I think it was really just some comments about the fire department administrative support staff. I don't think he was recommending that you do one thing or the other, but it wasn't an email to all of you. It was really to Elizabeth and I. It kind of seems a little more like inside, maybe just something for us to take into consideration as staff. So I won't
It'll
read,
be in the public record, correct?
I won't read that into the record because it wasn't to the commission.
Director Pratt, I received it though.
Oh, you did?
Yeah,
Oh, you all received it. Oh,
I just checking my email right now and I'm
We did,
realizing
yes.
it is here.
oh,
yeah.
okay. It doesn't show up. He must have BCC'd you because it doesn't show up as a CC. Maybe he did it separately.
Yeah, I got it too. I just saw it. Yeah.
He suggested a doorbell and a phone number be installed on the front door of the Harbor Patrol, I think. In some place, in some area.
So I guess his email was really related to the fact that they're with the reorganization of the fire department administrative staff. I'm sorry, this came at 6:15, so I haven't really had a chance to look at it. That perhaps that would mean that no one would be stationed out at the Crow's Nest. Is that what he's?
Yeah, I believe he believes that if the budget is cut and the support staff is gone, that there will be nobody at the Crow's Nest.
And then he said, as we move forward on the comprehensive public amenities plan for the harbor, including a public boat ramp, a discussion would seem appropriate regarding what staffing and tools the harbor patrol may need to discuss future increase in harbor activities. Okay, so he's not making any real recommendation related to the budget, which is what you were just considering.
Mm-hmm.
He just has some concerns if people are moved around, what that might mean operationally for a couple of things. So we can put this in the record. I don't see anything here unless someone else does that affects your motion. So we'll go ahead and
Next, the motion I do support, I have tried to get them at the thing and knocking on the door. It doesn't always work.
yeah, understood. Got it. But that's the only public comment that we have then.
Okay.
Okay, so that'll be part of the public. Does anybody want to recommend an action based on that?
No.
Okay, so I think I had a motion and a second to receive and file the staff report and related documents. Any opposition to that? Okay, good
All right,
job.
great. Thank
Good
you.
discussion.
Appreciate that.
Appreciate the early, scheduling this early so that we could get input in a timely manner.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next item on your agenda is the director's report, I believe. So, and don't take this wrong, it feels like we just met yesterday. So I don't have a really extensive director's report for you, but I do have a few items that I want to mention. At the city council meeting, just to remind you of what went to the council between your last meeting and tonight and what's coming up on the council agenda. The council on May 18th approved a resolution for Swim Across America Open Water Swim Day. That was also the night, as I mentioned earlier, that the budget was released. So those are a couple of items that affect the harbor. On last night's city council agenda, we had an agenda item that was an estoppel certificate for the Portofino Hotel. They are refinancing their debt. And typically when someone refinances their debt, their lender requests something called an estoppel certificate, which is really more or less just lets them know the lender that they're in good standing with us as the city. So Portofino Hotel is moving forward with that. And then there was a small lease amendment to the Redondo Beach Hotel lease to eliminate their furniture, fixtures, and equipment reserve fund. They're the only lessee in the harbor that has a furniture, fixtures, and equipment fund that was built into their lease. As part of COVID, they had asked the city council if they could dip into that fund to help offset some of their operating losses. And then they subsequently requested if they could just eliminate that as a requirement. We didn't have a real issue with it, neither did council. They approved that unanimously last night. So that was a fairly small amendment to them. The only thing that we have on the upcoming horizon for the month of June is we have a small sublease or a small lease with Charlie's on the Pier. We're going to move them from their month-to-month status back to a longer-term lease. So that'll be coming up to the city council on June 15th. Moving on to miscellaneous and follow-up items. Wanted to give you an update. I mentioned a couple of pieces of information related to the Public Amenities Plan RFP. We did receive 5 proposals, I think, as I mentioned earlier. We have a review committee established, which, as you know, includes Chair Light. It'll include, and some of the department heads, myself, Public Works, Community Services. It was probably the wrong time to put the RFP out because we have a lot of people involved in a lot of various budget components and trying to get all the budget pieces done. But we're going to meet as a group next Friday to do the initial review of the proposals. I was really pleased that we got the 5 proposals. I think they were all really good design firms. Most of them teamed up with a marine engineering or a civil engineering firm. So I think there were really 5 good quality choices for us to take into consideration. And we'll obviously be giving you a much more thorough update on that in your July meeting after the review committee has had a chance to go through those and determine whether there's a standout proposal that everyone can just recommend, or if there maybe are a couple that are really close and we want to bring them back to the Harbor Commission for maybe you to meet with a couple of them and hear what they have to say. So we'll be talking about that next week as part of our initial review of those documents. Wanted to give you an update. Commissioner Light had made a referral to staff regarding the Redondo Beach Sailing Club. I know you were thinking perhaps it could be a discussion item. I just wanted to let you know that I did meet with Mike and Sarah Martin from the Redondo Beach Sailing Club. I had an opportunity. I went out and met them out at the Portofino Marina probably a week and a half or so ago. It was really good to meet with them in person because it gave me an opportunity to understand what their concerns are regarding the Redondo Beach Sailing Club and the relationship of the sailing club to the city and how that relationship has been changing over these last few months. I think I have a pretty good understanding now of what their concerns are. And what I recommended to them is there is a budget response report that Councilmember Nierenheim has requested regarding the sailing instruction program within the city. And I think it's going to be important for the city council to hear that budget response report and kind of how the city is operating the sailing program, because the sailing club is almost a piece that comes right after the sailing instruction program. So a lot of people go through the sailing instruction program, and then the way they get access to vessels to continue their sailing education and enjoying sailing out in the harbor is they join the sailing club. And I think we're going to need to make sure and understand how the city wants to operate the instruction program, which currently operates at a deficit pretty much every year. So if they're going to make any changes to that, we'd like to understand what those changes are before we then try to figure out what the right relationship is between the sailing club and the instruction program. So my update was really just to let you know that I've met with them. I think we have a very good understanding of what the issue is. When the council goes through that budget response report, they may or may not take any action to change the operation of the instructional side. Once they've done that, I think we'll re-meet with them. I told Mike and Sarah I would meet with them again to talk about what that means for the club and how it moves forward. So just wanted to really give you an update and let you know that we had that conversation. COVID-19, we talked about this a few times as part of the budget discussion. LA County is still in the yellow tier, which means 50% indoor dining capacity. Bars are at 25% and retail at 75%. We are eagerly awaiting the June 15th date to see what happens. We're expecting that they won't lift the emergency order, but that they will just change the protocols and the operating requirements for some of the businesses, but may leave the emergency order in place. But we don't know. So everybody's waiting to see what happens on the 15th at the state level, and then what the knock-on effect is at the county level, whether the county just takes the state's recommendations wholesale, or whether the county continues to, as they have in the past, layer on somewhat more restrictive requirements. So hopefully by the time we next meet, we'll have some clarity around that and understand what that means for us down at the pier and the waterfront. Last thing was just a really short update on fireworks. I think I mentioned last time that the city council had approved 2 potential shows. We are clearly moving forward with the land-based show that would happen behind Seaside Lagoon. And the Riviera Village Association is going through the special events process to try to finalize the second show, which would be a Riviera Village sponsored event happening offshore down by Avenue I. So they haven't completed the special events process, but are optimistic they'll make their way through that effort and have a second show within the city. Other than that, upcoming events, the Pier Association is working hard to get their calendar back up and running on special events. That includes the summer concert series in July and August. That includes movie nights in September, rescheduling the Kite Festival, which would have happened in March, to September, having the car show in September. So September will be a busy month down in the harbor between the Beach Life Festival, movie nights, Kite Festival, and car show. The King Harbor Association is bringing back the car show that used to happen in the parking lot in front of Ruby's. So they are trying to resuscitate that and bring that back to life. So we're slowly seeing the special events start to come back to the harbor. I've told everybody it was a lot easier to shut everything down than it is to bring everything back to life. So we're slowly making progress on getting some of those things up and running on a go-forward basis. And then lastly, your next meeting is scheduled for July 12th. And at that point, we anticipate we will be talking about the Public Amenities Plan, RFP, and the consultant selection process as part of that agenda. That concludes my report, but I'm happy to take any questions or comments that some of you may have.
Looks like none.
Or not.
Oh, Roger?
I'll ask a quick one. If we do reopen, do we continue meeting by Zoom, or do we ever,
Great
move
question.
back to the big hall?
I should have in fact, there's 2 other things I should mention. The first thing is, and I should have said this at the beginning of the meeting, I am so happy to see Lori's face in one of our boxes here. She has finished her time in community services. As you know, the city's hired a new community services director, Cameron Harding. He started about a week and a half ago. So Lori is still moonlighting and pinch hitting on a couple of cleanup items to get them through the budget process, but she's coming back to Waterfront and Economic Development full time, which is making Elizabeth and I very happy. It's just been 2 of us now for about 6 months. So we've been pedaling the bicycle as fast as we can. So we're glad to have her back. But to your question, I will let you know when we're going to be meeting in person. The last thing I had heard, and it was a bit of an offhand comment, was that the likely in-person meetings would resume in July. The city council chambers has gone through a brand new overhaul, all new dais, seats, video equipment. So you'll be happy to see you have a whole new set of equipment and tools to work with in there. So there's a very real chance that your July 12th meeting could be an in-person meeting in the council chambers, and we'll have to let you know what protocols that may include, whether everyone's wearing masks and just how all that stuff works. But there was a conversation that like I said, it was kind of a quick conversation that happened at a department head meeting where there was a suggestion that we would be doing in-person meetings in July. And I don't know if that was July 1st or July 15th. So it kind of depends on where we are on that particular process, but it's coming soon, if, you know, within the next month, and certainly by August, I would think that would be the case.
Yeah, thanks. Just curious. Or July 2022. We'll see.
Yeah, no. We're hoping it's, I'd like to see y'all in person in July, a July 12th meeting. So hopefully that's when it'll happen. But,
Perfect. Director Pratt, I have a real quick one.
Yeah.
The 4th of July this year falls on a Sunday. Are they planning on doing both fireworks shows at the same time on the 4th?
At the same time, meaning
Well, same day, same night.
same day, yes, same
Okay.
day. So they would stagger the start times, but they would be done on the same day.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, any other items from staff?
No, we're good. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, any referrals from the commission?
No?
Vicki, Roger?
I have one, and this is kind of a what if question. I was thinking about sea level rise and some of the long-term leases we had, and Director Proud, I actually sent you an email along this. So for the rest of the commission, we can talk about this another day if it's even possible. We have these long-term leases out there, you know, and then they come up in the next 15 to 20 years. There are probably some, you know, there are definitely some buildings that look pretty old, but if you're sitting there owning this building and you have a new lease coming up in 15 years, that's pretty short. You're not going to do anything to improve that building or do anything for sea level rise. So if we were to potentially offer some of these master leases an extension in the lease now, maybe in exchange for that carrot, we could get them to do something about sea level rise instead of, you know, having these buildings sit as they are and in 10 years be underwater. In the original Noble and Associates sea level rise package we got a couple of years ago, they said, you know, you need to be ready to see a foot or two of sea level rise this decade, you know, by 2030. And it's hard to find funding for that. So if we can, you know, do the public-private partnership and get some of these guys to fund it as part of refurbishing their building, it may be worth considering. I don't know. It may be impossible. It may be, you know, a problem with the lease or something else I'm not thinking of, but it was just something I thought of one day as I was walking around the harbor.
Yeah, we, you know, it's a good question, and you know, we actually do have a handful of master leaseholders who are starting to approach us in terms of doing their lease renewals. You know, not surprisingly, a lot of people will come to us 5 or 10 years before their lease is ready to expire and want to renew their lease for another extended term. So, and if you just looked at the expiration dates themselves, some of the biggest leases in the harbor are going to expire within the next 11, 12 years. Places like King Harbor Marina, Port Royal Marina, Cheesecake Factory, you know, so some of the bigger leaseholds will be coming up and coming due over the next, you know, 10 to 15 years. So the timing is good as those folks are starting to come in to start to think through. Typically, when the city renews leases, we require a significant capital investment for the lessee to re-up their lease. It's really one of the requirements as part of the lease renewal process is what kind of capital investment are they going to make into the leasehold. You know, that can be things that benefit them, building improvements and upgrades, but that could also include things like improvements to address sea level rise. So, you know, the timing is not bad, and it's certainly something that we could maybe agendize a little bit down the road in terms of thinking about some lease renewal, maybe policies or strategies or something along those lines, to try to think through what kinds of improvements we'd like to see incorporated into our long-term leases. So, yeah, it's probably not something I get back to you in the next month or two.
Yeah, and I wouldn't expect
something.
that. Yeah.
But it's certainly something we can put on the radar screen. And since we are getting contacted, I can tell you there's at least 4 direct leaseholders with the city who've reached out to us who are interested in renewing their leasehold. So the timing is good to start to think through some of these matters.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I know we always ask for a little bit of capital improvements, but it seemed like this time we might be asking for a little bit more, you know, out on the sidewalk and seawall.
Yeah. And that's, that comes at a cost. I mean, they have to figure out how they're going to absorb and amortize those expenses over the life of the lease. So, it'll be interesting to kind of think through, some of the leasing program and some of the terms and lease options that we've put out there before, whether those are things we still want to do in terms of leaseholds or whether we need to modify our leasing strategy a little bit for the master leaseholders.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Hey, anything else?
I'm not sure who you called on for referrals to staff or who's left.
Matt, were you coming on, Matt?
Oh, I'm good.
Okay. Let's see, Steve. Okay, Tom,
Nothing for me, thank you.
Leslie,
Nothing.
Vicky.
No, nothing.
Okay, I've got one. Well, first off, I want to thank you for contacting the Martins on the sailing club. They did. They sent me an email. I think they were impressed that you reached out to them. So I think it sends a good message to the community. So really appreciate that. And I would like you to take a look at that email I forwarded you from Jeremy.
Yeah.
And perhaps there's some of those operational considerations for the hand launch boat ramp going into this summer that we could consider. So, I'll leave it to your discretion, but that may be a good topic for the next meeting to consider some of those recommendations.
Yeah, and for the rest of the commissioners, Jeremy sent an email to Chair Light, who sent it to me like at 6:05 or 6:10.
Yeah, I got it also.
Oh, you got it. Okay,
I
so
got
maybe
it,
he sent it. Maybe it's one of those ones he sent to everybody as well. I have not had a chance to even look at it yet or digest it. So, I told Chair Light I would look at it after the meeting. And
It's very well written and there's some really valid points.
Yeah.
okay, we'll take a look at that.
And changes that have happened because of COVID. So I think there's some concerns.
Some great history there.
Take a look at that and considering that for the next meeting, but I'll leave it at your discretion.
Okay.
And that's really all I had. So with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Anybody opposed? Okay, so we're adjourned to July. We're going back on regular schedule, so July 12th, correct?
Happy 4th.
Happy 4th.
Happy 4th.
All right. Thank you all very much.
Everyone,
Appreciate it.
happy
Nice
June
seeing y'all.
15th.
Another great meeting. Appreciate everybody, staff and the commissioners.
Take care.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thanks a lot.
Take care.